The desert can take a life in minutes, but sometimes fate gives a second chance in the most unexpected place. Today's story begins with an Apache woman who closed her eyes, ready to die under the burning sun, only to wake up in a cowboy's bed miles from where she fell. What happened between those moments will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, make sure you like this video, share it with friends, and comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to Cowboy Chronicles for more Wild West tales. Now, let's get started this story. The desert wind hissed across the barren plains as Taya staggered forward, each step a battle her body was losing. The sun had baked her skin, turning her lips white and dry, and every breath dragged fire into her chest. She had escaped the raiders 2 days ago, but their bullets and blades had already left their mark. The wound along her ribs pulsed with agony. She knew the desert did not forgive weakness. When she finally collapsed against the burning ground, she felt her spirit drifting like dust toward the sky, convinced that her final moment had arrived. Vision blurred into wavering shadows as she tried to keep her eyes open. The world tilted, the sky spinning above her, and her heartbeat slowed to a distant thud. She whispered a prayer to her ancestors, asking them to guide her. She had accepted death, embraced it even because there was nothing left to fight with. Her tribe was gone, her strength was gone, and the scorching earth beneath her felt like the last embrace she would ever know. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the darkness pulling her down. Far away, Luke Harrison rode across the plain atop his bay horse, searching for cattle that had scattered during the early morning storm. Luke was a man carved from the West itself, stern jaw, sun-worn hands, and a quietness that came from years of living without anyone beside him. As he steered his horse toward a dry creek bed, he noticed something unusual, a shape lying motionless in the dust. His instincts sharpened instantly. He slowed his horse, scanning the horizon for ambush. Only silence answered him, but something about the still figure tugged at him to look closer. Luke dismounted and walked carefully, one step at a time, his hand resting near his revolver. As he knelt beside the figure, his suspicion melted into shock. It was a woman, an Apache woman, bruised, wounded, barely clinging to life. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her hands twitched weakly as though even unconscious she still fought unseen enemies. Luke's jaw tightened. He had seen death many times, but something about her made him pause. Leaving her here would be the same as pulling the trigger himself, and he was not that kind of man. He lifted her gently, surprised at how light she was, her body limp as a broken branch. The wound at her ribs was deep but not hopeless, not if he worked quickly. Luke secured her across his saddle, mounted up, and urged his horse toward home with as much speed as the terrain allowed. Each mile carried more risk, raiders, bandits, or even his neighbors who might not understand why he was helping her, but Luke ignored all of it. Survival in the West meant doing what was right, even when it was dangerous, even when it didn't make sense to anyone else. By the time he reached his cabin at the edge of the valley, the sun had dipped behind the mountains. He carried her inside and laid her on his bed, the only bed he had. Luke cleaned her wound with steady hands, stitched the torn skin, and bandaged her ribs with strips of linen. She never woke, only murmured faintly in her language, as though speaking to spirits he could not hear. When he finally stepped back, exhausted but determined, Luke watched her breathing and hoped she would survive until morning. Something deep within him didn't want her to die there. The night passed slowly, filled with the crackle of firewood and the soft rise and fall of her breath. As dawn crept through the small window, light brushed her face gently. Taya stirred, her fingers twitching beneath the quilt. Her eyes blinked open, and she stared upward at a ceiling made of wooden beams. Confusion flooded her. Nothing was familiar. She pushed herself up with a sudden jolt, pain tearing through her ribs, and she grabbed the edge of the blanket defensively. Her heart hammered as she realized she was lying in a stranger's bed, surrounded by things she had never seen. She tried to stand but collapsed back onto the mattress, clutching her side. The door creaked open, and Luke stepped inside holding a bowl of warm water. Their eyes met, both startled. She tensed immediately, her body ready to defend itself even while weak. Luke raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man used to taming skittish horses. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You were dying out there. I brought you here so you could live." Taya studied him, searching for deceit, but she found only a cautious sincerity. Still wary, she whispered a question in English heavy with her accent. "Why would you save me? She expected hostility, anger, the usual hatred between their people. Instead, Luke pulled a chair beside the bed and shrugged. "Didn't seem right to let you die," he replied. "Doesn't matter who you are, someone needed help. That was enough." She didn't understand this man, not his calmness, not his gentleness, not his refusal to treat her like an enemy. She watched him dip a cloth into the warm water and hand it to her, waiting for her permission to come closer. Taya hesitated, but exhaustion overwhelmed suspicion. She accepted the cloth and pressed it to her cracked skin. Luke rose to give her space, but not before offering a cup of water. She took it slowly, drinking in tiny sips that felt like heaven in her dry throat. As the minutes passed, she realized she was alive because this stranger had carried her, healed her, and given her shelter. She didn't know whether she should fear him or trust him. But one truth settled deep within her. Whatever fate had planned for her before, it had changed the moment this cowboy found. Her. Taya rested, but her eyes never left Luke as he moved around the cabin, preparing broth on the stove and checking her bandage. Every creak of the floorboard made her tense. Luke noticed but didn't push, understanding that trust wasn't something earned overnight, especially between their people. After sipping the warm broth he offered, she felt strength returning to her limbs. But along with strength came questions, fears, and memories of the attack that had shattered her life. She turned her face away, hiding the tears forming in her eyes. Luke didn't ask what she had lost. He recognized that pain. When night fell again, Taya's breathing was steady, and Luke sat outside the cabin under the stars. His horse grazed nearby, ears twitching at the distant howl of coyotes. Luke rubbed his forehead. Unsure what he had pulled himself into, he had enemies enough as it was: land disputes, cattle thieves, men who wanted his ranch. Bringing an Apache woman into his home was the kind of decision that could bring trouble he didn't need. But when he had found her dying in the dust, he hadn't thought about consequences. He had simply listened to the voice inside him. Next morning, Taya tried to stand again. Though pain rushed through her side, she managed to take a few steps before grabbing the wooden table for support. Luke was chopping firewood outside, but he came rushing in at the sound of her gasp. "Easy now," he warned gently. "You'll tear the stitches if you push too fast." She clenched her teeth, frustrated at her weakness. "I need to go," she whispered. If the raiders who attacked her tribe were still searching for survivors, staying here could endanger both of them. Luke shook his head. "You can't even walk without bleeding." Taya stared at him, anger rising in her chest. "You don't understand," she said. "My people." She stopped, swallowing the tightness in her throat. Luke lowered his axe and leaned against the doorway. "I don't need to understand to know you're not ready to travel. You'll die out there. And if anyone is hunting you, they've probably moved on by now." She didn't reply, but her silence was a storm. Luke gestured toward the bed. "Rest, I'll keep watch." For the first time, Taya believed him, not because of his words, but because of the quiet determination in his eyes. Over the next few days, their silence slowly softened. Luke taught her how to change her bandage herself. She helped with simple tasks, sorting dried herbs or handing him tools. They spoke little at first, but when they did, their conversations stretched longer each time. Taya told him about her tribe, about the songs her mother used to sing, about the stories she learned as a child. Luke listened with more attention than he ever gave another soul. In exchange, he shared memories of growing up alone on the ranch, of losing his parents young, of surviving one hard winter after another. One afternoon, while gathering water from the stream behind the cabin, Luke noticed movement on the ridge, 3 men on horseback, rifles slung across their saddles. He stiffened instantly. They weren't raiders, they were ranchers from town, men who had never liked him. Luke returned to the cabin quickly and whispered for Taya to stay out of sight. She slipped behind the curtain with silent footsteps, her instincts sharp as a blade. A moment later, heavy boots stomped onto the porch. Luke opened the door, keeping his expression unreadable. "Heard you been keeping company with someone dangerous," one man sneered. Luke's jaw clenched. He didn't flinch as the man stepped closer, peering past him into the cabin. "Nobody here but me," Luke replied calmly. The rancher smirked. "Word is you rescued one of them savages. Folks don't like that. Folks think maybe you're switching sides." Luke felt heat rise in his chest. He stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "I don't owe anyone an explanation for what I do on my land." The rancher's smirk faded. "Be careful, Luke. Some choices don't get forgiven around here." After a tense stare down, the men rode off, leaving only dust behind. Taya emerged slowly from behind the curtain. You protected me, she said softly, her eyes searching his. Luke shrugged, though his heartbeat was still pounding from the encounter. You're under my roof, that's all that matters. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. They would kill me if they found me, and they might kill you too. Luke looked at her, seeing her fear clearly under the strength she always tried to show. Then they'll have to go through me first, he said firmly. Something shifted between them in that moment, something deep, unspoken, and undeniable. For the first time, she felt safe. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, they sat near each other, watching the glow illuminate the room. Taya traced the edge of the quilt with her fingers, a small, thoughtful smile on her lips. You saved my life twice now, she whispered. Luke didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire before speaking. Maybe you were meant to be found, he said. Maybe I was meant to find you. Their eyes met, holding a silence filled with feelings neither dared to voice. Outside, the night air carried the distant howl of wolves, but inside the cabin, there was only warmth. By morning, Taya's strength had returned enough for her to stand without trembling. Luke saddled his horse, ready to ride to town for supplies. Before he left, Taya stepped close to him, her hand lightly touching his arm. When I closed my eyes to die, she said, I thought that was the end, but I woke up in your home. Why? Luke looked at her, a rare softness in his voice. Because the world took enough from both of us. Saving you felt like giving something back. Taya nodded slowly, her eyes shining with gratitude, understanding, and something gentler. As weeks passed, her wounds healed fully, but her heart was no longer the same. Luke had become more than a rescuer. He had become a place of safety she never expected to find. And Luke, who had lived so long in silence, now found peace simply hearing her breath beside the fire. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Taya stood beside him on the porch. The wind brushed her hair, and she looked at Luke with steady eyes. I will stay, she whispered, not because I must. Because I choose to. Luke's breath caught softly. In that quiet moment, two souls standing at the edge of a world that had tried to break them both, they realized something undeniable. They were no longer two lives crossing by accident. They were two hearts choosing each other. In a land shaped by violence, loss, and survival, they had found something rare, something worth holding on to. And so the Apache woman who had closed her eyes to die woke not just in a cowboy's bed, but in a life she never imagined possible. A life where she was safe. A life where she was wanted. A life where she was loved.